So welcome.
Thank you.
So from a historian's perspective, is India as a nation on the decline or on the rise?
I think it is a mixed story. In many ways, I believe India is on the rise. If we place India in the larger context of Asia, which is what I'm doing in my new book, there is absolutely no question that Asia as a whole is recovering the global position that it had lost 200 years ago. We have made substantial progress ever since independence. I find among the youth of India a sense of self-confidence, which you probably would not have seen even when we were growing up in India. So those are the positive aspects. But I think there is a lot to worry about. There are deep-seated inequities. There are serious inequalities in our society and our economy, which are not being addressed with the urgency that they require. And I am truly worried that there is a wave of injustice, unreason, and inhumanity that is sweeping across the country, which we euphemistically call intolerance. And I want to be very clear, I don't think that India as a country is intolerant. What I would like to emphasize is that many people who happen to wield political power in India today are spreading a virulent form of prejudice and bigotry. And we have to be very concerned about the poison of religious hatred in particular that is being unleashed. But also I think that our subordinated castes and classes are being further oppressed. And we need to do everything in our power to reverse those negative trends.
Do you think religion has a place in politics?
I believe that there is nothing wrong with religious faith. So religion is not our enemy. We have to be very clear that we are opposed to religious prejudice, religious bigotry. Having said that, I really do feel that our state must keep an equidistance from all religious communities. I don't want to rehash the old secular dogma, because secularism had been reduced to a slogan. It had become a facade for a multitude of sins. Both secularism and socialism by the 1980s had become justificatory ideologies for our centralized state. And when they began to fail, when people felt that our political leaders were being hypocritical when they were talking about secularism, there was a shift towards religious majoritarianism in defense of that centralized state. So I think we need to be self-critical, but ever since the late 1980s and early 1990s, I have felt that we needed to rethink secularism. I'm entirely in support of secularism as a system of values which we should treasure, but we should not be simply mechanically talking about secularism as an ideology of state. We have to think in terms of equal citizenship, and we have to make sure that all citizens, regardless of which religious community they might belong, are given equal rights and equal opportunities in our country.
So talking of self-criticism, is the Trinamool Congress government in West Bengal maintaining equidistance from all religious communities?
I think so. I believe that all citizens, all residents of Bengal are treated equally. Now, we did actually inherit a situation which became absolutely clear in the Sarkaria Commission report, for example, where Muslims had been left behind in terms of access to education, to employment, to housing, to bank credit, and so forth. And there we had to rectify injustices of the past. But overall, I feel that everyone is being treated equally.
How do you look at this shape? How do you look at basically the democratic institutions that we have standing up to these times, especially in the context of a majoritarian government?
I think all of our democratic institutions are facing a severe stress test in this age of majoritarianism. Even in Parliament, we feel that the legislature is not being given the respect and the importance that it deserves. There have been serious concerns even about the judiciary when senior judges come out and hold a media conference saying that democracy is in danger. We have to take that seriously. Media is, of course, a very important pillar of democracy, because democracy is not just about elections. Democracy is about public discussion. I sense when I speak to journalists that they too are sometimes cowed because of an atmosphere of fear. But I sense that the mood of the nation is changing. I think we are at the cusp of a major shift. And people had been afraid even until a few months ago. But now I think that the trend towards inhumanity, towards injustice, towards unreason has gone so far that people are beginning to feel that they must resist. I had said even in my first speech in Parliament, given in June 2014, that we must not confuse majoritarianism with democracy, or uniformity with unity. And that message, I think, is beginning to get across 4 years later in 2018.
Another question, I'll take away from the political figures, but you work on colonial trade, industry relation. I mean, there used to be a saying, what Bengal thinks today, India thinks tomorrow. Looking at two Bengals, Bangladesh and West Bengal, where did West Bengal lose out? Now Bangladesh is making progress. Now it's almost garment factory of the world. They have brought down IMR, MMR, all those things. So they have marched ahead. Where did West Bengal lose out? Can you, like you put 1810 as a decade where Asia diverged and the West took over, can you pinpoint a period or a decade where West Bengal lost out, and it even lost out even within India?
Well, if you are looking at the longer term, I talked about economic stagnation in India as a whole in the first half of the 20th century. That is true, of Bengal as well, if we are thinking about the agrarian sector. All of my early work was on the agrarian history of colonial India. However, even in those days, Bengal had a certain standing in terms of industry and so forth. But in the mid-1950s, once there was a freight equalization scheme and so forth, Bengal began to lose out even from that point onwards in terms of its industrial potential. Also, during the long years of communist rule, 34 years of communist rule, to begin with, the Left Front introduced some moderately progressive land reforms. But there was nothing very positive to report in the second half of that 34-year period. There was no new industry. There was nothing very dramatic to report in the agrarian sector as well. And there was one very major mistake. There was not enough attention given to education and health. That is why you find that Bangladesh's performance in those sectors, even girls' access to primary education, or bringing down infant mortality rate or maternal mortality rate that you were referring to, Bangladesh has not just done better than the Indian average, but so far they have done better, we have to accept, than even West Bengal. However, we hope to learn from the mistakes of the past, and if we resolutely focus on these two areas, education and health, I think that we will be able to make the kind of progress that, in fact, all Indian states need to make.
So earlier when you were talking about democratic institutions, you mentioned fear among journalists. One of the things that is also held as a sword over journalists and media houses is nationalism. If you criticize us, you're anti-national. Your thoughts on that, sir?
I think it's very important to recognize that nationalism is a truly Janus facet phenomenon. It has a liberating aspect. It can have a very oppressive aspect. In fact, Rabindranath Tagore, in his book on nationalism, described it as one of the most powerful anesthetics invented by humankind. But the nationalism that is being propagated by those who are in power today, I had described even in my parliamentary speech as narrow, selfish, and arrogant. And that is a kind of nationalism that we must be prepared to contest. Nationalism at its best is always critical of itself. And that is a basic principle that we should keep in mind. Love for one's own country cannot mean that you're going to beat up someone who is not prepared to shout, Bharat Mata Ki Jai. And also, just to say that no one can be a univocal spokesperson for the Indian nation. There can be multiple visions of the Indian nation, and we ought to be able to have healthy debates about it.
No. Sir, a few minutes back you said that you are seeing a change in 2019. But if we see the figures of recent Panchayat polls of West Bengal, BJP has recorded a rise in vote share. And in last 5 years, nearly 70% increase has been witnessed in the shakhas of Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh in West Bengal, RSS. So, in that scenario, what challenge TMC is seeing from BJP and RSS in 2019?
The BJP has certainly increased its vote share, and it appears to be displacing the CPIM as the principal opposition party. Now that has a lot to do with the failure of the left to survive its loss of power since 2011. But I think that the Trinamool Congress is enormously popular in Bengal today, and if anything, the BJP may come a distant second in some seats. So in electoral terms, I think the BJP is a long distance away from mounting any serious challenge in Bengal. But that does not mean that I don't have worries about Bengal. We haven't had a kind of politics of religious polarization in Bengal in the post-independence period. In fact, we haven't had very much conflict of the kind that has taken place in other parts of India since, I would say, 1965. So I do hope that Bengal will be able to preserve, peace among, religious communities, and that what the RSS and the BJP are trying to foment is in fact a religious polarization, which they hope will bring them electoral dividends. But Bengal has a very long and deep political tradition of unity among different religious communities, and it is my hope that that will triumph over the politics of polarization.
So wasn't giving stipends to imams also polarization?
Look, my own view is that we ought to have concentrated on providing justice to the minority community in the fields of education, employment, housing, credit to start businesses, and so forth. That is my personal view. We must not make the mistake of making religion the enemy of the nation. Let's focus our attention against religious bigotry and religious prejudice.
Congress is the main opposition party in the center, but if you look at the different states, regional parties are appearing more stronger than Congress. So in that scenario, when the Congress is projecting Rahul as the next PM nominee from the opposition side, do you think that regional parties, when Congress discusses with their other opposition parties, should the other parties should they project somebody from the regional from a region like TMC, from like Mamata Banerjee or Mayawati or somebody else as a PM nominee?
Is the Congress projecting Rahul Gandhi as the PM nominee? They seem to have an open mind so far. I think that if there is a new government, which I hope there will be after the next general elections, the Prime Minister will be a first among equals. It will be a very different scenario from what we see today, where the Prime Minister is all-powerful and even his cabinet ministers are relatively insignificant. And therefore, there are many, potential prime ministerial, candidates. And it is natural that, as a Bengali, I may have a preference for Mamata Banerjee as Prime Minister. And that is not just for sentimental reasons. Even if you look at objective criteria, she was a 7-term Member of Parliament. She has spent 7 years as Chief Minister. She has been a Cabinet Minister 3 times. So, if Narendra Modi could make a bid for the Prime Ministership on the basis of his record as Chief Minister of a middle-sized state, and that record was nothing to be proud of, particularly in its early years, then I don't see why, a Chief Minister of a larger state who has also played a role in national politics, cannot be accepted as a legitimate candidate for the Prime Minister's post. Similarly, Mayawati has been chief minister of the most populous state in India, and therefore she might have a legitimate ambition of becoming prime minister. The Congress will likely be the larger party compared to the regional parties, even if they do extraordinarily well in their own states. And I suppose that's the basis on which there are members of the Congress who might want to project Rahul Gandhi. I think he may have done better if he had served as a minister in Manmohan Singh's government. That may have strengthened his bid. But we'll see. I don't think that's the most important issue, the question of leadership. As I said, the Prime Minister will only be the first among equals. So the next election is likely to be much more than a presidential contest about who might become the next Prime Minister. It will really be a contest about what kind of India do we want to see in the future. What form should the Indian Union take?
So just to follow up on that, and then I'll come back to something else you mentioned earlier, but what would be the 3 or 4 things that a Mamata Banerjee government would do differently, aside from this religious, cultural sort of piece? Maybe something economic that you think would be different from what Modi has done?
Well, the question is, what has Modi done? He promised Achhe Din, but that phrase has almost been forgotten. I haven't heard him utter that phrase in recent times. And what does seem to have happened is that a couple of billionaires seem to be calling all of the shots so far as our economy is concerned. And we really need to have an economic program that promotes the interests of 1.35 billion people rather than the interests of a couple of favored billionaires, industrialists. There will certainly be more welfare. There will certainly be greater emphasis on primary health care. There will be more emphasis on primary and secondary education. There will have to be more emphasis on higher education as well, making our universities an attractive place for our students and bringing in the best scholars that we can find. It will also be a more federal India where states' rights will be respected. And as I said, it will also make sure that our subordinate castes and classes their interests are protected.
How do we reconcile the fact that capitalistic societies seem to really admire strongmen leaders? So, I mean, NASDAQ has never been so high. The economy of Turkey is booming. India's sort of all-time sort of stock market records was, I think, yesterday. So, is that a trend that's, a political trend that has always happened, or?
Look, there have been strong men from, many, different political traditions. Hitler was, of course, supported by German big business during the 1930s. But the other strongman, Stalin, led a monolithic sort of communist party of the Soviet Union. So strongmen can emerge from many different kinds of political traditions. But I think the point that you're making is a different one, that capitalists seem to like strongmen. They seem to support them. When there's a strong man in charge, the stock market booms. And yes, I think that that capitalists look for stability, and they falsely believe that it is a strong man or an authoritarian regime that can provide that kind of stability, a context in which they can earn their profits. What they don't often see is that these authoritarian regimes may appear to be strong, but they are actually quite brittle. And again, you know, why should be guided by the profits that are being made by, you know, a handful of businesses and industries?
Taking a long arc of modern history and diplomatic community, geostrategy community is debating this, but as a historian, how do you look at aggressive China and its imperialistic tendencies? Do you see draw parallels like 1914 when the peak of imperialism and then the ambitions of one nation state to just gobble up more territory? So how do you, I mean, is there a parallel or as a historian, can you inform the present from the light of past?
I think we need to place the rise of China in a couple of different contexts. One is the global context, and there, of course, China is the challenger. You know, the United States is the status quo, you know, superpower. But then we also have to place China within an Asian context. For a while, particularly China under Deng Xiaoping was being very cautious, and they were focusing on strengthening their own economy. They almost wanted to hide, as they put it, their rise. They were biding their time, as it were. But of course, we have seen China under President Xi Jinping, which is much more assertive. And any, you know, rising power of this kind will almost inevitably pose certain challenges to their immediate neighborhood, to their neighbors, and so forth. But I believe that one of our greatest political and diplomatic challenges in the 21st century in India will be to see how we can peacefully manage the simultaneous rise of China and India. But what we really need to avoid are the kinds of nationalist conflicts which completely undermined the idea of Asia and of Asian universalism. But we should not just be thinking of the short term. China has articulated its vision, the role that they want to play in Asia and the world. I think that it is time for India also to articulate its vision about the kind of Indian Ocean arena they want to see in the future, the kind of Asia that we want to see in the future. Because our best thinkers had never been inward looking. They had all wanted to contribute to the shaping of a global future. And that's something that we in India should not shy away from doing at this moment. I also raised the question of the Institute of Eminence label being given to a non-existent institute, the Geo Institute. And I asked why not a single central or state university had been included. You know, clearly Geo Institute is being recognized for its potential 3 years from now or whenever. So I asked, I mean, does not a single central or state university have the potential to become a world-class institution? There can be no question that the IISc of Bangalore, the two IITs in Delhi and Mumbai, deserve the Institute of Eminent status. But we have to be more accommodating of universities. Look what China did. When China decided that they were going to have some of their universities break into the top 100, they chose Peking University, Tsinghua University, Fudan University, all of which are now highly ranked universities. So they are not just going for institutes of technology, they are going for truly universal universities.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for coming here.